Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a pretty major development in Turkish politics, this nationwide boycott. It was organized by the main opposition party, the CHP, on April 2nd, 2025.
That's right. And you wanted to dig into this because it's quite significant. It was triggered, really, by the arrest of Istanbul Mayor Ekrem Imamoglu. Plus, there were all these allegations from the CHP about justice violations by the ruling AKP and President Erdogan. So we've gathered the key aspects for you.
Okay, great. So let's jump in. The spark, the catalyst, was Imamoglu's arrest, right? March 19th, 2025. And the charges were corruption and terrorism.
Correct. But what's really striking is how widely it was seen as politically motivated,
Yeah.
given his position. He's considered a strong potential challenger to Erdogan, and he'd already won against the AKP in Istanbul
Ugh.
twice.
Yeah, those Istanbul elections were a big deal. So the perception was this wasn't just about law, but about politics.
Exactly. The government, of course, framed it as, legitimate legal action, tackling corruption, national security threats. But the opposition saw it totally differently, fabricated charges to knock out a rival. And this view, it fueled massive anti-government protests. We're talking hundreds of thousands in the street demanding his release.
Wow. And even though he was actually in prison, the CHP went ahead and confirmed him as their presidential candidate.
They did, which is quite a statement, isn't it?
Yeah.
Shows their determination, perhaps.
Definitely. So, okay, this leads to the boycott itself. How did the media cover it? Sounds like a split screen situation.
Oh, absolutely. A tale of two narratives. The pro-government media came down hard. They called the boycott sabotage, an effort to wreck the economy. Some even labeled it a coup attempt.
A coup attempt, that's strong language.
Very strong. You had figures like the Interior Minister, Ali Yerlikaya, and the Trade Minister, Omar Bolat, actively condemning it, and President Erdogan himself accused the opposition of trying to, quote, sink the economy.
Okay, so that's one side. What about the opposition and independent outlets?
They framed it completely differently, as a legitimate democratic response, a reaction to Imamoglu's arrest and what they described as democratic backsliding. But being critical had consequences.
Like what?
Well, Sözcü TV, for example, an outlet critical of the government, faced a broadcasting ban, and international media. They mostly echoed the opposition's narrative, focusing on those democratic concerns and the government's legal moves.
Right. So the CHP, led by Özgür Özel and initially pushed by student groups, they called for this boycott. Using consumer power was the idea. How much did people actually participate?
It's a bit hard to gauge perfectly. We saw reports, definitely, shopkeepers closing down in CHP strongholds, like Kadıköy in Istanbul. 19 publishing houses apparently stopped sales for the day.
Okay, so some visible actions.
Yeah, and anecdotal reports of cafes being emptier, fewer customers out and about in Istanbul and Ankara. But the actual extent, it probably varied a lot across the country.
Yeah.
And predictably, pro-government media just downplayed it, said it failed.
And there was pushback online, too.
Oh, yeah. Government supporters used the hashtag boycott Dagel Milazar, which means something like, not a boycott, national harm. It really highlights just how divided Turkish society is over this.
Now let's talk economics. Turkey's economy was already, well, struggling. High inflation. What were the specific worries about this boycott?
Yeah, the government was clearly nervous it would make things worse.
Yeah.
Trade Minister Bolat specifically warned about economic instability. Vice President Yilmaz tried to dismiss the boycott's impact, but still cautioned against it.
So mixed messages, but underlying concern.
Definitely. And they issued some pretty stern warnings, too. Talked about legal consequences for economic sabotage.
Yeah.
The business community also largely came out against the boycott, worried about disruption.
And the government did follow through with legal action.
They did. Criminal investigations were launched against organizers. The charges mentioned were things like incitement to hatred and preventing economic activity. And sadly, there have been reports of over 2,000 detentions since Imamoglu's initial arrest, with some concerning reports about mistreatment.
That's serious. And wasn't there some irony? Didn't the government itself call for boycotts before?
That's a really interesting point, yeah. There's an apparent contradiction because the government has previously encouraged boycotts, specifically against, businesses accused of charging excessively high prices. So their stance here seemed inconsistent to critics.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what's the immediate political fallout, and what might this mean for Turkey going forward?
Well, short term, it definitely ramped up political polarization. You saw the opposition mobilizing, becoming more unified in some ways. Erdogan's strong accusations, the opposition digging in, defending Imamoglu. It just deepened the divide.
And then long term.
That's harder to say. It really depends on whether the public stays engaged, how the government continues to respond. Imamoglu is such a key figure, a potential future leader. So this whole episode could heavily influence future elections, maybe even trigger calls for early ones.
And the government's crackdown suggests they're sticking to a hard line.
It certainly looks that way. It signals they aren't backing down easily.
So, putting it all together, this CHP boycott wasn't just one thing. It was political, economic, legal, and it really just threw the deep divisions in Turkish society into sharp relief.
Absolutely. And it makes you think, doesn't it, about these moments where political protest uses economic tools. It reflects these wider challenges to democratic norms, that constant tension between, citizens' rights and state power. Maybe considering other historical examples of similar actions could give us some clues about where this might all lead.